bulldozer's engine roared to life at 7:13 a.m., precisely when I was 3 states away at my daughter's college graduation. I only realized what was happening when my neighbor Frank sent me a frantic video of my grandfather's 1,890s cabin being reduced to splinters. That's right, while I was watching my daughter receive her diploma, HOA President Karen was demolishing a century-old family heirloom that had been specifically protected by the Massachusetts Historical Preservation Act since 1978. She didn't just cross a line, she erased it with a bulldozer and a smirk. Watch closely and comment below where you're watching from, because this story's about to get explosive. The shaky video Frank sent showed more than just destruction. It captured Karen standing there with her arms crossed, a clipboard tucked under one arm, wearing that infamous red power suit she reserves for HOA, enforcement actions. My grandfather's hand-hewn beams, the stone fireplace where I'd spent countless winter evenings, the carved initials of 3 generations, all being crushed under metal treads while she checked items off her list. I excused myself from my daughter Emma's celebration, finding a quiet corner of the university quad to make sense of what I was seeing. Emma found me there, still staring at my phone in disbelief. "Dad, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. The ghost of my family's heritage disappearing in real time. I showed her the video, and her graduation joy immediately transformed into the same shock and rage I was feeling. But that's illegal. Grandpa's cabin is protected. Everyone knows that. Everyone except Karen Wilkinson, apparently, or more likely, she simply didn't care. I made frantic calls to Frank, to the local police, to anyone who might be able to stop what was already nearly complete. By the time I reached the police, they said they'd need to look into the situation and determine jurisdiction between HOA authority and historical preservation laws. In other words, they were useless in the moment when I needed them most. What should have been one of the happiest days of my life, watching my daughter graduate summa cum laude, had transformed into a nightmare. Emma insisted we leave immediately. "We can celebrate later, Dad. We need to get home now." The 5-hour drive back to Riverside, Massachusetts was the longest of my life. Emma tried researching historical preservation laws on her phone, while I white-knuckled the steering wheel, alternating between shock and fury. "Dad, this is actually crazy," she said somewhere around hour 3. "If the cabin is registered with the State Historical Society like Grandpa always said, Karen could be in serious trouble. We're talking potential criminal charges, not just civil." I wanted to believe her, but at that moment, all I could see was the loss, not just of a structure, but of my family's legacy. My grandfather, James Miller Sr., had been the town doctor for over 50 years. That cabin, built by his father in 1891, had been where he treated patients during the Spanish flu, when the town hospital was overwhelmed. During the Great Depression, it became an unofficial food bank. My own father had maintained it meticulously, and when he passed it to me, I'd promised to do the same. The property had been grandfathered in when the Lakeside Estates development was built around it 15 years ago. I'd been explicit with the HOA from the beginning about its protected status. So what had changed? Or more accurately, who had changed the rules? Karen Wilkinson had only been HOA president for 6 months, but in that time she'd managed to alienate half the neighborhood with her increasingly aggressive community standards campaign. By the time we pulled into our driveway, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered near the destruction site. The cabin, or what remained of it, was now just a pile of splintered wood, broken stone, and memories reduced to rubble. Frank Lopez, my retired journalist neighbor who'd sent the video, hurried over to my car. "James, I tried to stop them. I showed them the Historical Society paperwork you gave me last year, but Karen said it was superseded by HOA regulations and threatened to call the police if I interfered." I looked at the destruction site again, trying to process what I was seeing. My daughter put her arm around me, a strange reversal of our usual roles. In that moment, I made a decision. Karen Wilkinson had no idea who she was dealing with or what she had just set in motion. 2 weeks before the demolition, I'd received a certified letter from the HOA demanding removal of the unauthorized structure within 30 days. I'd immediately called Karen, invoking the historical preservation status. Her laugh still echoed in my head. Those old laws don't apply to our community vision. Sometimes progress requires letting go of the past. I'd sent a formal response with copies of the preservation documentation but received no reply. Now I understood why. She'd already scheduled the demolition crew, deliberately timing it to coincide with my absence. What I couldn't figure out was why. Why target a harmless historical cabin that had been standing peacefully for over a century? What was so urgent about removing it that it couldn't wait for due process or even basic decency? Frank invited Emma and me inside his house, away from the curious eyes of gathering neighbors. His dining room table was covered with papers, photographs, and notebooks. "I've been doing some digging," he said, the investigative journalist in him clearly energized despite the circumstances. "This isn't just about your cabin being an eyesore like Karen claims. There's something bigger happening." He spread out several documents, including what appeared to be architectural plans. These were posted briefly on the HOA website last month before being taken down. Notice anything? I studied the plans showing what appeared to be a luxury clubhouse and pool complex. My heart sank as I realized the proposed location, exactly where my grandfather's cabin had stood until this morning. "But that's not all," Frank continued. "Karen's brother-in-law, Derek Wilkinson, owns Summit Development. Guess who just got the no-bid contract to build the new community center?" The pieces started falling into place with sickening clarity. This wasn't just about community aesthetics or power-tripping HOA enforcement. It was corruption, plain and simple. Karen had orchestrated the destruction of my family's historical property for personal gain. Emma, who had been quietly examining the documents, looked up with fierce determination in her eyes. "Dad, we're not letting them get away with this." She was right. The old cabin might be gone, but this fight was just beginning. Before I could respond, Frank's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and raised his eyebrows. "It's Melissa Chen from the HOA board." He put it on speaker. "Frank, is James back yet?" Melissa's voice was hushed, almost a whisper. "Yes, he's right here with me," Frank replied. "Tell him I need to meet somewhere private. What Karen did wasn't just wrong. It was illegal, and I have the board minutes to prove it. But there's more at stake than just the cabin." Before we could ask what she meant, she hung up, leaving us wondering what other secrets this HOA was hiding. The next morning, I met Melissa at a diner 20 miles outside of town. Her choice, not mine. She arrived wearing large sunglasses and a baseball cap, looking nervously over her shoulder as she slid into the booth across from me. "I'm sorry about your cabin," she began, removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes red from either crying or lack of sleep. "I tried to stop it, I really did, but Karen steamrolled the entire board." Melissa had been the HOA treasurer for 3 years, a position she took seriously. She pulled a USB drive from her purse and slid it across the table. "These are the real board minutes, not the sanitized versions Karen released. She never got proper authorization for the demolition. Only 3 board members voted, the minimum quorum, and she deliberately scheduled the emergency meeting when she knew the other 4 members couldn't attend. That alone violates our bylaws." I took the drive, turning it over in my hand. "Why are you doing this, Melissa? You're risking a lot." She stared down at her untouched coffee. "My grandmother came to this country with nothing after surviving the Holocaust. She taught me that when you see something wrong and stay silent, you become part of the problem." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "But there's more. The new clubhouse project? The budget is inflated by almost double what it should cost. I'm an accountant. I know when numbers don't add up. Karen and her brother-in-law Derek stand to pocket hundreds of thousands of dollars if this goes through." This was bigger than I'd imagined, not just the illegal destruction of my property, but systemic corruption that affected the entire community. "What's the next step in their plan?" I asked. Melissa glanced around again before answering. They're pushing for an emergency meeting tomorrow night to approve breaking ground on the new clubhouse. They want to move fast before anyone can ask too many questions about what happened to your cabin. After meeting with Melissa, I contacted Dr. Eleanor Rivers at the State Historical Society, who was appropriately horrified by what had happened. That cabin was one of the few remaining examples of late 19th century frontier medical facilities in the state, she explained, examining the wreckage with visible distress. The Preservation Act doesn't just suggest protection, it legally mandates it. This is a significant violation. She took dozens of photographs documenting the destruction from every angle while shaking her head in disbelief. I've already contacted our legal department. This isn't just an HOA issue anymore. The state will likely get involved. That was exactly what I was hoping to hear. With state backing, this wouldn't be dismissed as a simple neighborhood dispute. Dr. Rivers recommended an attorney who specialized in historical preservation cases, Martin Goldstein. Martin met me at his office that afternoon, reviewing the documents I'd gathered. The original historical designation paperwork, the HOA notices, Melissa's board minutes, and Dr. Rivers' preliminary assessment. As he studied the papers, his expression shifted from professional interest to outright shock. "This isn't just an HOA violation or even simple property destruction," he said, sliding a document across the table. "Based on these preservation records, what happened to your cabin might actually constitute a felony under state law. Karen didn't just break HOA rules, she committed a crime that could send her to prison." The document he'd highlighted was the original preservation designation, which clearly stated that intentional damage to the property could result in criminal charges. For the first time since seeing that video of the bulldozer, I felt a glimmer of hope. "So, what do we do now?" I asked. Martin's reply was immediate and determined. "We fight back. Hard." That evening, as I was reviewing strategy with Martin on the phone, Emma burst into the living room. "Dad, you need to see this." She turned up the volume on the TV, where a local news reporter stood in front of what used to be my grandfather's cabin, raising serious questions about the demolition of a historically protected property in Riverside. Sources close to the investigation say the HOA president may have violated state preservation laws and potentially misused HOA funds. The reporter, Sarah Johnson, had apparently received an anonymous tip, likely from Melissa, and was now digging into the story with obvious enthusiasm. The report cut to Karen Wilkinson attempting to shield her face from the camera as she hurried to her car. "Miss Wilkinson, did you know the cabin was protected by state law? Is it true your brother-in-law's company is set to profit from development on this site?" Karen's only response was no comment before speeding away, but her face showed something I hadn't seen before: fear. The emergency HOA meeting the next evening was nothing short of chaos. Word had spread throughout the community, and the small meeting room at the local library was packed beyond capacity. Karen arrived, flanked by two men in suits, her personal attorney and Derek Wilkinson. Her usual confidence notably diminished. She called the meeting to order, attempting to move directly to a vote on the clubhouse construction, but was immediately interrupted by multiple homeowners demanding answers about the cabin demolition. "This meeting will follow proper procedure," she insisted, her voice straining to maintain authority. "The agenda has been set, and—" "The agenda is a joke," Frank called out from the back of the room. "Just like the emergency meeting where you pushed through the demolition without proper quorum." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed red as she banged her gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order, or I'll adjourn this meeting immediately." That's when I stood up, Martin Goldstein at my side. "Before we discuss any new construction, I believe we need to address the illegal destruction of a state-protected historical property." Martin distributed copies of the historical designation and preservation laws to the board members and the front row of homeowners. My client's property was protected under Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40C. The demolition was not only unauthorized by proper HOA procedure, as the true board minutes will show, he nodded toward Melissa, who produced her copies, but it also constitutes a criminal violation of state law. Karen's attorney leapt to his feet. This is inappropriate. Any dispute should be handled through proper channels, not by disrupting official HOA business. Martin smiled thinly. I couldn't agree more about proper channels. That's why we've already filed for an emergency injunction against any further development on the site, and the State Historical Commission has opened an official investigation. The room erupted into shouting and questions. Derek Wilkinson tried to slip out the back door but was cornered by Sarah Johnson and her news crew. Karen repeatedly banged her gavel until it actually broke, the head flying off and narrowly missing an elderly resident in the front row. "This meeting is adjourned," she finally screamed, gathering her papers with shaking hands. As she attempted to leave, Dr. Rivers entered with a man in an official-looking uniform. "Ms. Wilkinson," Dr. Rivers called out. "This is State Preservation Enforcement Officer Timothy Blackwell. He has some questions about your authorization to demolish a protected historical structure." Karen looked from Dr. Rivers to Officer Blackwell, then to her attorney, who was already on his phone, speaking urgently to someone. The color drained from her face as she realized her carefully constructed plan was collapsing around her. For the first time since moving into our community and appointing herself arbiter of everyone else's property, Karen Wilkinson looked small. 3 days later, we all gathered in Judge Peterson's courtroom for the injunction hearing. Karen sat with her attorney, still projecting confidence despite the circumstances. The judge reviewed our filing, frowning as he examined the preservation documents. "These appear to be in order," he said, "but I'm troubled by the HOA's claim that they never received official notice of the historical designation." My heart sank. Was Karen about to slither out of responsibility on a technicality? Her attorney immediately seized the opening. "Your Honor, while we regret the misunderstanding, the HOA acted in good faith based on the information available. If Mr. Miller failed to properly notify the association of any special status..." The courtroom doors burst open and Sarah Johnson rushed in, clutching a manila envelope. "Your Honor," she said breathlessly, "I apologize for the interruption, but I found something in the county archives that changes everything." The judge, initially annoyed at the disruption, raised an eyebrow. "And you are?" Sarah identified herself as a reporter for the local news, explaining that she'd been researching the property records. "This is highly irregular," the judge said. But curiosity got the better of him. "Approach the bench." Sarah handed over the envelope, which contained certified copies of communications between the HOA and the Historical Commission, dating back 5 years. "As you can see, Your Honor," Sarah explained, "not only was the HOA officially notified of the historical designation when Mr. Miller joined the association, but Ms. Wilkinson herself signed the acknowledgement form when she became president 6 months ago." All eyes turned to Karen, whose attorney was frantically whispering in her ear. Judge Peterson studied the documents, his expression darkening. "Ms. Wilkinson, would you care to explain why you claim to have no knowledge of this property's protected status when it appears you personally signed this acknowledgement?" Karen's response was desperate. "That's just a standard form for incoming board members. I signed dozens of documents. I can't be expected to remember every detail." The judge was unmoved. "And the email dated just 3 weeks ago, where the Historical Commission specifically reminded you of the cabin's protected status after receiving complaints about potential HOA violations?" Karen's attorney tried to intervene, but she pushed him aside. "This is ridiculous," she shouted, her composure finally shattering. "It was just an old shed. I was improving property values." The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. "Ms. Wilkinson," he said icily, "one more outburst, and I'll have you removed. And based on what I've seen, you may be facing charges far more serious than contempt of court." Karen's lawyer leaned over and whispered something that drained all color from her face. In that moment, I saw the realization dawn on her that she had miscalculated catastrophically. The judge granted our emergency injunction, halting any development on the site, and ordered a full investigation into both the illegal demolition and the financial arrangements surrounding the planned clubhouse. As we left the courtroom, Martin was practically giddy. "We've got her cornered," he said. "The criminal investigation will be the final nail in the coffin." But even as we celebrated this initial victory, I couldn't help feeling hollow. The injunction couldn't bring back my grandfather's cabin or the generations of memories it had contained. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The State Historical Commission launched a formal investigation, interviewing everyone involved in the demolition. The demolition company owner revealed he had been paid in cash, a clear attempt to avoid documentation, and had been assured all permits were in order. Miss Wilkinson specifically requested we start early in the morning and finish as quickly as possible, he testified. When I asked about the historical marker on the building, she said it was obsolete and showed me an HOA document authorizing removal. That document, it turned out, was signed only by Karen and Derek, not by the required majority of board members. Meanwhile, Sarah Johnson continued her investigative reporting, uncovering a trail of suspicious financial transactions between Karen's personal account and her brother-in-law's development company. The story had expanded beyond our small community, with state news picking it up as an example of HOA overreach and corruption. Each new revelation strengthened our case, but also reminded me of what we'd lost. Emma returned to finish her final semester of college, but not before helping me salvage what we could from the cabin ruins. We carefully gathered splintered pieces of the hand-carved mantelpiece, the broken weather vane my great-grandfather had forged, and miraculously intact photographs that had been stored in a metal box. Frank and several other neighbors joined us, forming an impromptu archaeological team, everyone understanding the significance of what we were doing. My parents bought their first house in this neighborhood in 1975, one elderly neighbor told me as she gently brushed dirt from a broken ceramic bowl. Your grandfather treated my mother's pneumonia in this cabin when the hospital was full during a bad winter. Saved her life. Every object we recovered, every story shared, reinforced what I already knew. The cabin had been more than private property. It had been a community landmark and living history. A month after the demolition, an emergency meeting was called to reorganize the HOA board. Karen and two of her closest allies had resigned, leaving vacancies that needed to be filled. The meeting room was packed again, but the atmosphere was completely different, somber yet determined. Frank was nominated and unanimously elected as the new president, running on a platform of transparency and respect for historical preservation. Melissa retained her position as treasurer, now empowered to implement proper financial controls. In his acceptance speech, Frank addressed the elephant in the room. What happened to the Miller cabin was a tragedy and a crime. As a community, we failed to protect something precious. We can't undo that damage, but we can ensure it never happens again. He unveiled a proposal for new HOA bylaws that would require any decision affecting properties over 50 years old to undergo review by a historical committee and be approved by a supermajority of homeowners. The measure passed without a single dissenting vote. The criminal investigation proceeded methodically. Karen and Derek were both charged with multiple offenses: destruction of protected property, fraud, misappropriation of HOA funds, and conspiracy. Their attorneys attempted to negotiate plea deals, but the district attorney, sensing the public interest in the case, held firm. The state takes its preservation laws seriously, she told reporters. This case represents one of the most egregious violations we've seen in decades. Watching Karen and Derek appear in court for their arraignment, both looking significantly less polished than in their HOA glory days, should have felt satisfying. Instead, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. No punishment could restore what had been lost, yet accountability was necessary, not just for me, but for every homeowner who had suffered under their corrupt leadership, and for the principle that our shared heritage deserved protection. As the legal proceedings continued, Dr. Rivers approached me with an unexpected proposition from the State Historical Society. We'd like to offer a grant for reconstruction, she explained, showing me preliminary plans based on the extensive documentation they had of the original structure. It won't be the same cabin, of course, but it can be an authentic reproduction, using traditional methods and any salvageable materials. We see this as an opportunity not just to restore a protected structure, but to create a teaching moment about preservation. The grant would cover about 60% of the costs. The rest would come from my homeowner's insurance, which had initially balked at covering the demolition but changed their position when the criminal charges were filed, and the civil damages that would likely be awarded once the criminal case concluded. For the first time since the demolition, I began to feel something like hope. The cabin could rise again. Not as it was, but as a symbol of resilience and the community's recommitment to its history. As we made plans for reconstruction, I received an unexpected visitor at my door, Karen's ex-husband, Michael Wilson. He stood awkwardly on my porch, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm sorry about what happened," he said, his eyes unable to meet mine. "Karen and I have been divorced for 3 years, but there's something you should know about why she targeted your cabin specifically. It wasn't just about the development deal." He handed me a yellow newspaper clipping from 1982. The headline read, "Local Doctor Refuses Developer's Offer on Historic Property." The article detailed how my grandfather had declined what was described as a generous offer from Wilson Development Corporation to purchase the cabin property for a planned commercial development. The developer quoted in the article, expressing frustration at the refusal, was Robert Wilson, Karen's father. "My father-in-law, ex-father-in-law, never got over that rejection," Michael explained as I read the article. "He considered your grandfather unreasonable, an obstacle to progress. He complained about it for years, even after he moved his business to another town." Karen grew up hearing those stories. I stared at him in disbelief. "You're telling me she demolished my family's historical cabin because of a 40-year-old grudge her father held against my grandfather?" Michael shrugged helplessly. "It wasn't just that. The development deal with her brother was real, but when she realized which property it was, it became personal. A chance to finally correct a historical mistake," as she put it. I thanked Michael for his honesty, though the revelation left me with a bitter taste. The destruction of my family's legacy hadn't just been corruption and greed. It had also been petty revenge carried across generations. The criminal trial was mercifully brief. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of multiple witnesses, including the demolition contractor and Melissa, both Karen and Derek accepted plea deals rather than risk longer sentences. Karen was sentenced to 18 months in prison, of which he would likely serve 10, plus 5 years of probation. Derek received a similar sentence, along with substantial fines and restitution orders. The judge made a point of including an unusual provision in Karen's sentence: 200 hours of community service to be served specifically with the State Historical Society's Preservation Department. "Perhaps by assisting in the protection of other historical properties, you'll gain a better appreciation for what you so callously destroyed," the judge told her. As they were led from the courtroom, Karen finally looked at me directly for the first time since the demolition. There was no apology in her eyes, no recognition of the harm she'd caused, only the hollow anger of someone who still couldn't comprehend why her actions had been wrong. The reconstruction of the cabin began that fall, almost exactly a year after its destruction. The process was painstaking, with historical architects and craftsmen using traditional tools and techniques wherever possible. They incorporated the salvaged materials we'd recovered. The fragments of the mantelpiece formed a mosaic in the new hearth, the bent weather vane was carefully restored and returned to its place atop the roof. News of the project spread, and volunteers came from neighboring communities to help. Some were history buffs, others preservationists, but many were simply people touched by the story who wanted to be part of making something right. Emma drove home from graduate school on weekends to participate, learning timber framing techniques alongside retirees and high school students. Frank coordinated community efforts, turning workdays into neighborhood events with food and music. What had begun as a tragedy was transforming into something unexpectedly beautiful, a community literally rebuilding its connection to its past. Dr. Rivers used the reconstruction as a teaching opportunity, bringing in students from regional universities to document the process and learn about historical building methods. "This is living history," she told a group of architecture students as they watched a craftsman recreate the hand-hewn beams, not just preserving the past, but actively engaging with it. The project received media attention beyond our local outlets, becoming something of a cause célèbre in preservation circles. A documentary filmmaker began recording the process, interviewing me, Emma, Frank, and others about not just the destruction and legal fight, but the deeper meaning of historical structures in modern communities. "Your grandfather's cabin isn't just a building," the filmmaker told me. "It's become a symbol of resistance against the erasure of history and community identity in the face of development." I wasn't entirely comfortable with becoming a reluctant poster child for preservation, but if our story could help protect other historical properties, perhaps some good could come from our ordeal. 1 year to the day after the demolition, we held a dedication ceremony for the reconstructed cabin. Over 200 people attended, including Dr. Rivers, Martin Goldstein, Melissa Chen, and many neighbors who had supported us throughout the ordeal. Sarah Johnson covered the event for the local news, interviewing attendees about the cabin's significance and the community's journey. The state's lieutenant governor even appeared, using the occasion to announce new legislation strengthening preservation protections across Massachusetts, legislation informally dubbed Miller's Law by its sponsors. As I stood on the porch of the reconstructed cabin, looking out at the gathered crowd, I felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in what we'd accomplished, lingering grief for what had been lost, and profound gratitude for the community that had rallied around us. The cabin was different, of course: newer wood alongside the salvage pieces, modern hidden reinforcements ensuring it would stand for another century, but its spirit remained intact. I had prepared a speech for the dedication, but standing before the microphone, I found myself setting aside my written remarks. "My grandfather used to say that a building isn't just wood and stone, it's the stories it contains," I began. "When Karen Wilkinson ordered the demolition of this cabin, she thought she was just removing an outdated structure that stood in the way of her plans. What she didn't understand was that you can't bulldoze history or community memory." I gestured to the rebuilt cabin behind me. "This isn't just my family's cabin anymore. Through its destruction and rebirth, it's become something that belongs to all of us. A reminder that some things are worth fighting for, that the connections between past and present matter, and that a community united can overcome even the most determined efforts to erase its heritage." Frank stepped forward to unveil the new historical marker, which incorporated the original designation but added text acknowledging the demolition and community-led reconstruction, ensuring that even this difficult chapter would be part of the cabin's ongoing story. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the caterers began clearing away the refreshment tables, I found myself alone on the cabin's porch with Emma. "Grandpa would be proud," she said, leaning against the railing, "not just of the cabin, but of how you fought for it." I put my arm around her shoulders, remembering how she had supported me through the worst moments of this journey. "He would be prouder of you," I replied, "the next generation carrying forward what matters." We stood in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the reconstructed roof with golden light. Through the window I could see the restored interior, similar to what had been lost, but also different in subtle ways. Like our community itself, it had been transformed by what it had endured. The cabin now stood as a stronger symbol than ever before, not just of my family's history, but of a community's commitment to protecting what matters. The granite marker outside now reads, "Twice built, never forgotten." Sometimes it takes losing something to truly understand its value, and sometimes it takes a battle to forge a stronger community. As for Karen, I hear she's working for a historical society in another state after serving her sentence, applying her organizational skills to preservation rather than destruction. I'd like to think my grandfather would appreciate the irony and the justice in how his beloved cabin ultimately changed not just our neighborhood, but an entire state's approach to protecting its heritage. 6 months after the dedication ceremony, I received an unexpected package in the mail. The return address was from a nursing home in a neighboring town. Inside was a small wooden box with a note attached. "Found among my mother's belongings. I believe this belongs with your cabin. Margaret Thompson." I didn't recognize the name, but when I opened the box, I found a collection of black and white photographs, most dating from the 1920s and 30s, showing my grandfather treating patients in the cabin. Among them was a faded photograph of a young woman holding a baby, standing proudly in front of the cabin. On the back, written in faded pencil, "Elizabeth Thompson and baby Margaret. After Dr. Miller saved us both, 1925. A quick search revealed that Elizabeth Thompson had passed away just a month earlier at the age of 98, having lived her entire life in our county. Her daughter had found these treasured photographs and recognized the cabin from the news coverage of our fight against the HOA. The photos now hang in the rebuilt cabin, part of a growing collection of community memorabilia that continues to find its way back home. The cabin has taken on a new role in our community, not just as a historical structure, but as a gathering place and a living museum. Every Saturday morning, I open it to visitors, sharing not just my family's story, but the stories that continue to emerge from community members who connect their own histories to this place. School groups come through regularly, local artisans demonstrate traditional crafts on the porch during summer festivals, and the Historical Society holds its quarterly meetings around the large oak table that now stands where my grandfather once treated patients. What was meant to be erased has instead become more deeply woven into the fabric of our community than ever before. The legislation inspired by our case, officially titled the Historical Property Protection Enhancement Act, but commonly known as Miller's Law, passed the state legislature with overwhelming bipartisan support and was signed into law on the second anniversary of the demolition. Its provisions include mandatory training for HOA board members on historical preservation requirements, substantial criminal penalties for intentional violations, and a simplified process for homeowners to register historically significant properties. The bill's sponsor, a state senator who had followed our case closely, invited me to the signing ceremony. "Your grandfather's cabin has become a symbol of something much larger," she told me as we watched the governor sign the legislation into law. "It's about who gets to decide which parts of our past are worth preserving, and ensuring that those decisions aren't left solely in the hands of developers or HOA boards with their own agendas." The documentary about the cabin's destruction and rebirth premiered at a regional film festival the following spring, winning the Audience Choice Award and securing distribution on a major streaming platform. Titled Preservation: The Battle for the Miller Cabin, it placed our local struggle in the context of broader tensions between development and heritage protection across the country. The filmmaker had expanded the project to include similar cases from other states, creating a compelling narrative about the importance of community engagement in preservation efforts. Emma attended the premiere with me, both of us somewhat uncomfortable with seeing our personal ordeal dramatized on screen, but grateful for the wider attention it brought to preservation issues. "It's weird seeing strangers cry over our cabin," she whispered to me during one particularly emotional scene depicting the demolition. But by the end, as the film showed the community coming together for the reconstruction, I understood its power. Our story had resonated because it touched on something universal: the human need to maintain connections to the past even as we move into the future. Derek Wilkinson's development company folded in the aftermath of the scandal, his reputation in the industry irreparably damaged. I heard through Frank that he'd moved to Florida after serving his reduced sentence, attempting to start over in a place where his name wouldn't immediately trigger recognition and distrust. Karen, in contrast, remained local after her release, though she sold her house in our community and moved to a neighboring town. I occasionally spotted her at the grocery store or gas station, our eyes briefly meeting before one of us would look away. We never spoke, the weight of our shared history creating an unbridgeable gap. I had expected to feel satisfaction at her downfall, but instead found only a complicated sadness. Not for her specifically, but for the waste of it all. A community divided, resources squandered on legal battles, A historical structure needlessly destroyed and painstakingly rebuilt, all because of greed, arrogance, and a decades-old grudge. Melissa Chen emerged as an unexpected leader in our community's transformation. After her pivotal role in exposing the corruption within the HOA, she founded a regional organization called Community Preservation Alliance, bringing together homeowners, historical societies, and local governments to develop collaborative approaches to protecting significant properties while accommodating reasonable development. What happened with your cabin showed me that preservation isn't just about buildings, it's about power and who gets to decide what stays and what goes, she explained at the organization's first conference, which was held fittingly on the grounds surrounding the reconstructed cabin. The event drew over 300 attendees from across the state, including developers interested in finding more constructive ways to work with preservation requirements. Melissa's practical approach, acknowledging both the importance of heritage and the reality of changing community needs, has made her organization increasingly influential in regional planning discussions. Frank's leadership of the reformed HOA has been equally transformative. Under his guidance, the organization has shifted from an enforcement-focused entity to a true community builder. The new clubhouse was eventually built but in a different location, and with a design that complemented rather than competed with the neighborhood's historical elements. Frank insisted on a transparent bidding process, which ultimately saved homeowners nearly $200,000 compared to Derek Wilkinson's inflated proposal. The facility now hosts regular community events, from holiday celebrations to educational workshops on topics ranging from gardening to, yes, historical preservation. In a particularly meaningful gesture, one wall of the main gathering room features a large photograph of the original cabin alongside images of other historically significant structures in our area, a constant reminder of what was nearly lost and the community's commitment to preventing similar incidents in the future. At Christmas time, the university turned our experience into a case study for her preservation classes at the State University, bringing students to visit the reconstructed cabin and learn about both the legal protections for historical properties and the practical challenges of enforcing them. What makes the Miller cabin case so valuable as a teaching tool, she explained during one such visit, is that it demonstrates both the vulnerabilities in our preservation system and the potential for community action to strengthen those protections. Several of her students have gone on to careers in preservation law or administration, citing our case as a formative influence in their professional development. One particularly dedicated student spent a summer documenting oral histories from community members with connections to the cabin, creating an audio archive that now complements the physical structure in telling its multi-layered story. Sarah Johnson's investigative reporting on our case earned her a regional journalism award and eventually led to a position with a major newspaper, where she continues to cover issues related to development, historical preservation, and community governance. The Miller cabin story showed me the importance of local journalism in holding power accountable, she told me when she stopped by to visit the reconstructed cabin on the 3rd anniversary of the demolition. Without local reporters digging into county records and showing up at HOA meetings, cases like yours might never come to light. Her ongoing reporting has revealed similar conflicts in other communities, though thankfully few have reached the destructive conclusion ours did. The publicity surrounding our case and the resulting legislation has made HOAs and developers more cautious about challenging historical designations, aware of the potential legal and financial consequences. The ripple effects of our struggle continued to spread in unexpected ways. A law school professor from Boston used our case as the basis for her students' moot court competition, challenging them to argue both sides of the complex legal issues involved. A nearby high school developed a civic engagement curriculum around local governance and preservation, bringing students to the cabin to discuss the balance between property rights, community standards, and historical significance. The State Tourism Board added the cabin to its Historical Heritage Trail, bringing visitors from beyond our immediate community to learn about its unusual twice-built history. Each new connection reinforced what I had come to understand, that the value of preservation lies not just in maintaining physical structures from the past, but in the continuing dialogue between past and present, between individual property rights and community heritage. As for me, the experience changed me in ways I never expected. Before the demolition, I had valued my grandfather's cabin primarily as a private family heirloom, a personal connection to my roots. The fight to hold Karen accountable and the subsequent reconstruction transformed my relationship with it. I became active in regional preservation efforts, joining the board of the State Historical Society and advocating for stronger protections for vulnerable historical properties across Massachusetts. Emma followed her own path, connected to our experience, incorporating aspects of heritage law into her graduate studies in urban planning, exploring how communities can protect their historical identity while accommodating growth and change. Our shared ordeal had revealed to both of us the fragility of physical connections to the past and the importance of active stewardship to maintain them. On quiet evenings, I often sit on the cabin's porch, watching the neighborhood children play on the commons across the way, their parents chatting in groups nearby. The physical structure around me is both old and new. Some original materials salvaged from the destruction, others carefully crafted to match what was lost. It stands as a tangible reminder that preservation isn't a static process of simply maintaining what exists, but sometimes requires rebuilding, reimagining, and recommitting to the values embodied in historical spaces. I think of my grandfather, who saw this cabin not just as a family possession, but as a community resource, opening it to those in need during times of crisis. In its new life, the cabin has returned to that broader purpose, a shared space where our community maintains its connection to its own story. So remember, the next time someone tells you that rules are rules, make sure you know which rules actually matter, because sometimes the oldest rules are the ones with the sharpest teeth. And when those teeth bite back against those who would erase history for profit or petty revenge, justice doesn't just repair what was broken, it builds something stronger in its place.